Today, we're going to talk about a story from South London that is as gut-wrenching as it is powerful. It's the story of a young woman who fought for her freedom with everything she had, but whose desperate pleas for help, they just went unheard. This is the story of Benaz Mahmod.
And this quote, wow, it just cuts right to the heart of it all. You see, the real tragedy here isn't one of silence. It's the story of a young woman literally screaming for help and of a system that just failed to listen. So who was Benaz Mahmod? Well, she was born in Iraq back in 1985, and she came over to the UK as a kid with her Kurdish family. They were looking for a new, safer life. And, to the outside world, they looked like a pretty traditional, close family. But what was happening behind closed doors? That was a totally different story.
At just 17 years old, Benaz was forced into an arranged marriage with a man who was much, much older than her. And this marriage, it was just a complete nightmare of abuse, both emotional and physical. But in her community, to speak out against that was seen as a huge betrayal of the family's honor. Benaz, though, she wasn't going to be silent. And this is where you really see this tragic clash of worlds. On one hand, her family demanded total obedience, all in the name of so-called honor. On the other hand, Benaz just yearned for what so many of us take for granted: personal freedom, the freedom to leave her abuser, and, to fall in love with someone she actually chose. But to her family, what she saw as love, they saw as a source of deep, unforgivable shame.
And this is where things get really, really critical. Benaz did not suffer quietly. No way. She actively went out and she begged for help over and over again. We're about to look at the 5 times she went to the police and the tragic pattern of dismissal that followed every single one of her pleas. 5. Not once, not twice, 5 separate times. And we're not talking about some vague feeling of being scared. This was a young woman who knew with absolute certainty that her life was in serious danger. And she went, again and again, to the very people who were supposed to protect her. I mean, her warnings were just chillingly specific. She didn't just say, "I'm scared." No, she told the police about direct threats made against her life. She told them about a previous attempt to kill her that her own family had orchestrated. She gave them names, her father and her uncle. She even handed them a letter, a final, desperate plea to be opened if she was murdered, listing every single person who would be responsible. She gave them everything. And still, after all of that, after how clear she was, how many times she went, the authorities just didn't grasp the urgency. It was a catastrophic failure to understand, a fatal underestimation of the danger she was in, and she was left almost completely unprotected. And that failure to act, well, it had the most devastating consequences imaginable. Her disappearance and the horrifying discovery that came later were the direct result of that inaction. This was preventable. So, on January 24th, 2006, Benaz just vanished. Her boyfriend, knowing exactly what she had feared, immediately ran to the police. But his pleas were dismissed too. It took days, critical, lost days, before a serious investigation was finally launched. It was then that investigators started to realize they were dealing with one of Britain's most notorious cases of so-called honor-based violence. And let's be really clear about what that is. It's a crime committed not to defend honor, but to enforce control through fear. It's about punishing those who challenge a twisted, rigid code. Benaz's only crime? She simply wanted to live her own life. The search ended in the worst way you can possibly imagine. 3 months after she went missing, her body was found hundreds of miles from home in Birmingham. She had been buried inside a suitcase. The horrific truth was finally confirmed. She had been murdered by men recruited by her own father and uncle. But in the face of this horrific failure, something truly extraordinary started to happen. A new investigation, led by a detective who absolutely refused to let Benaz down, turned into this massive, groundbreaking pursuit of justice, an effort that would end up crossing international borders. So you have this incredible detective chief inspector, Caroline Good, and she just tenaciously unravels the entire murder plot. And then they do something that had never been done before. They manage to extradite suspects all the way from Iraq back to the UK to face charges, a historic first. And in the end, her father, her uncle, and all the other conspirators were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. So while her story is just an unbelievable tragedy, it's also a story of immense power. The voice that was ignored so brutally in life became this huge catalyst for change, a voice that, believe it or not, continues to save lives today. She was only 20 years old. Just think about that. A life filled with so much potential, cut short just because she wanted the simple freedom to love. But the life that she lost gave birth to a powerful and truly lasting legacy. Her case forced a real reckoning within the British police. It led to these sweeping nationwide reforms in how officers are trained to recognize and respond to the very specific threats of honor-based violence. Her story started a difficult but absolutely necessary national conversation. And the new protocols that were put in place because of her have, in fact, saved other people from the same fate. In death, her voice finally became a roar that was impossible to ignore. And that really leaves us all with this. Benaz's story is a stark, painful reminder of the cost of not listening. It forces us to ask a very direct and very personal question. If someone comes to you and they tell you they are in danger, will you listen?